Okay, so welcome to this session on your role in the community, which is a session which is aimed mainly at dive leaders or newly qualified dive leaders, but actually it's relevant to BSAC divers in general. So what we're going to talk about today. So the aims of this session is so that you understand how to think a little bit more like a leader, um, develop inexperienced and other divers, recognize and influence risky behavior, act like a role model, and promote diversity and inclusivity. So there's a fair bit to get through, but we'll start with what it means to be a leader. Now, first of all, it's good to get you guys involved early doors. So if you can, the more that you put into this, the better. The more we'll get out. So, what sort of things would you say? One-word answers are good characteristics of a leader. So, it might be something like confident or something like that. Anyone got any ideas? So Chris is saying empathy. Martin's come up with patience. Example. Someone else is saying empathy, understanding. James says buys the beers. Yep. Anything else? Okay. So some really good ones there, and empathy is quite an important one, which is good to see that that's come into it. Some of the things that we've put down on this slide. So it's not limited to this, but things like integrity, honesty. So that's a good one. Martin's just thrown in there an extra one. Organized, and Luke role player. Yeah, brilliant. Ability to dedicate. So this is a good example of being a leader. So being able to hand off some of the roles and responsibilities that you might have picked up. Communication skills, empowerment, positivity, and humility, problem solving skills, and then it's missing off this list. But yeah, absolutely, empathy is a really important one. That's a good example of a leadership skill. Now, what does it mean to be a leader? So we've broken down some of the more common traits here. So what do we mean by integrity? So it's someone who's got strong moral principles and is willing to stand up for what you believe in, and that might be just in general, you want to stand up for human rights, or it could be that you stand up for the principles that you're trying to uphold on any given day, and those might be the principles of BSAC. So there are lots of good examples of that. Diversity and inclusion we're trying to embed in BSAC as a community, so you might want to stand up for those, but there's other things as well. So honesty. Now, how can honesty be a good characteristic of leadership when we're talking about diving? So things like your limits, being honest about your own limits and also about the limits that you might be thinking about of others and your own previous experience, and also dive reporting. So this comes a little bit into role model behavior that we'll talk about later on. But for example, you want to be giving honest reports of your dives if you're not actually the dive manager, so that is, don't go deeper and then not tell the dive manager, that sort of thing. So that sort of goes without saying. Ability to delegate. Now, I mentioned this earlier. So as a leader, you need to pick up the ability, and it will come with time, the ability to identify other people in your club, in your diving party, in your team, who are capable of taking some of the burden off you. Now, the idea is that a leader is not someone who does everything. That's not going to be feasible, especially in the diving world. You need to get other people to help you. So you need to identify those people, and hand off those tasks appropriately. And also, there's a mention there of planning to emergencies. So that's very important. So if you've got if you have an incident occur, then it's really important that you are not trying to do everything that yourself, and that you are delegating. And also, the important thing in an incident, or just generally being a leader, is actually taking leadership, actually taking control, and starting to go and give out instructions to people, because there'll be that sort of people flapping, headless chicken sort of moment where no one's really working very cohesively. And it's really important as a leader and as a dive leader that you are immediately jumping in there and saying, right, okay, I've identified these are the things that need to happen. You do this, and you do this. And that sort of delegation sometimes is not very easy to do off the cuff. So this is where the planning part of it comes in. So have a plan about how you would delegate things. That's a really good start. Communication skills is a good one as well. So you need to be able to convey what it is that you're trying to do to the team, whether it might be trying to teach someone or develop someone, or it might be organizing the diving day itself. Essentially, you need to have good communication skills and able to what's the word? You need to be able to command your audience so that they are picking up everything, all the important points that you're trying to get across, and then they're going and doing them. If you're stuttering and taking your time and beating around the bush, people will drift off. You know how it is when you get a dive briefing at the start of a day. Got the smell of bacon wafting over the dive site, and all you want is to go and get a coffee or go to the toilet. You need to have the attention of everybody, and you need to get all the points across in a clear and concise manner. So that's quite important. Empowerment is really important. So you need to, as a dive leader, you need to be taking this role where you are trying to buoy up the rest of your club, and especially those members of your club who might be less experienced, or they may be just need some encouragement. So this sort of ties in quite nicely with the delegation, but it's not quite the same. So it's encouraging people to do more to stretch their own abilities. Now that might be taking on some responsibilities on a day, or it might be encouraging them to, develop their diving skills or whatever it is that they're trying to achieve on that day. Positivity is absolutely paramount. No one likes a gloomy Gus when they're out on the dive site. Definitely not me. You want to be portraying yourself as an upbeat, positive, and approachable person, especially in the face of adversity, which, as we all know, is a relatively common occurrence on any diving day. There's always something goes awry, and you need to stay upbeat and positive, and make other people positive by sort of osmosis. If you're happy, other people will tend to be happy. If you're gloomy and stressed, it will pass on. So try and keep positive. Humility, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later on, but yeah, recognizing your own limits. Again, that sort of feeds back into the honesty. Problem solving skills. So yeah, this is a really good one. And again, it's that adversity thing, isn't it? So if you've got things that are thrown up, usually adversity is not adversity if you can plan around it appropriately. So, but there's always going to be certain certain incidents that are going to be outside of what you've planned. Being able to think outside the box or solve those in new and innovative ways is always going to be useful. And as I mentioned earlier, that willingness to take charge is quite important. And that's both in the day-to-day, giving the briefings at the start of the day, but also in complex situations, it's really important. So first of all, something that dive leaders should be and could be doing, if they're not already, is dive planning. Now, a lot of clubs just leave this to the committee, but there's a great opportunity there for you to further your own skills and also to influence your branch. Now, I know it's not the same in every club. Different clubs have different dynamics. So a university club will behave very different in its planning to a sort of your traditional BSAC club with an older demographic. So yeah, different clubs will do things in slightly different ways, and obviously there's qualifications and experience that are going to subtly change that in each. But as the dive leader, generally speaking, you will be an experienced member of the branch. You might even be one of the more experienced members of the branch. So you should be going out and planning dives yourself. Obviously, we should always be going out diving, shouldn't we? But we should also try and help others to plan. But the important thing is to be proactive and self-motivated. Now, it's very easy to be very relaxed about these things, and just especially if you're diving within the inland waters, if you're perpetually diving in quarries and such, it's very easy not to plan them in great detail. Actually, at this level, you ought to be planning them in a lot more detail than you might have done in the past. And also, it's really strongly encouraged for you to plan dives that are slightly more challenging. So, ocean dives, boat dives, these types of things, obviously within the limits of the dive leader role. So you shouldn't really be planning dives which are outside of the experience of the club. That would be an advanced diver type of job. But it's not to say you couldn't help in that. You could find yourself surrounded by more experienced and qualified persons, and that's a very common occurrence for dive leaders. And that's also fine, because those people may be doing more advanced planning. So it's a great opportunity there for you to learn on the job. Maybe you haven't run planning sessions at all before. If you haven't, then get involved. This is where it's that don't ask, don't get. If there are other members of your branch that are leading these sessions, ask those people if you first can perhaps observe, and if once you've observed, then take a more active role in actually leading those sessions. They should be very happy to hand off and delegate that to you. Now, with regards to dive management, you can be a dive manager once you're a dive leader, and you are responsible for the safety. So it's quite an important job. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you have to stay dry. The person in the photo there is being a dive manager, but you'll see they are wearing a dry suit, and that's because they are going to go diving. And that's where the delegation comes in. So you delegate parts of the job to other people, including an assistant dive manager. You definitely do not have to be the most experienced person on the trip. That's quite important, because I'm aware that some people find themselves a little bit shy to come forward and do these, if that so and so, who's a first class diver and a national instructor, is on the trip. They will be absolutely over the moon to have a dive leader leading, because it's good to see progression within the branch. So do put yourself forward for this. So you will still, whether or not you're the most experienced person on the boat, you'll still be seen as a role model. So you should take it as a great opportunity to demonstrate that. And you are still in charge. Never mind that someone is a first class diver or something like that, and you're the dive leader, dive manager. You're the person who's in charge, and that is, you've got the devolved authority of the diving officer. That is that. Okay. Bear in mind that it's a separate job from the person who's planning. You don't need to plan and dive manage. You can do both, obviously, but it's not that you need to have both of them hand in hand. You're just there to do the stuff on the day. But as I say, it's not a requirement for you to do both. Now, a really good part, I think, personally, of being a dive leader is you've got this opportunity now, a much greater opportunity to develop other divers. Now, here's an open question for you. If you've got your chat open, what sort of divers might you help develop? Any ideas? Thank you. Yeah, scuba divers is a very nice facetious answer. Yeah, so a couple of people are saying ocean divers, which kind of falls under the whole less qualified section, doesn't it? As well as sports divers. Yeah. We've also got they might be the same qualification as you, but they could just be less experience. So this was, as Danny said, anyone looking for advice and someone to look up to as a role model. Yes, absolutely. So that falls into that category. And then Chris has covered my next point beautifully. He says, everybody, you have more seasoned divers who have not practiced the skills in years. And this is also echoing a little bit what James has said as well, who said all divers. Yeah. So you're not forced to just develop your ocean divers and your sports divers. You might find yourself a more experienced or a more skilled diver, or you might just be a better diver. It happens than the person who's 200 years old and has been diving since God was a boy. You might actually be able to teach them some new tricks. So yeah, that's a really good thing to bear in mind. Now, realistically, it's going to probably be more less experienced divers that you're going to be influencing than your first class divers and your advanced divers. But nevertheless, what sort of things do less experienced divers need, do you think? So if you've got the chat going, then drop some answers in there. What sort of thing would, if you think back to when you were a novice diver, what would you need from the more experienced members of your branch? So James has said, good example. Barry's confidence building, encouragement. They're all really good answers on a sort of similar theme, aren't they? So yeah, it's pretty much what we've got down here, which is reassurance, instruction, demonstration. One that a lot of people will miss off there is observation. So they need to, and that's not necessarily observation in terms of someone to watch over them for safety reasons. It's also observation for observing how they are progressing in diving and perhaps giving a little bit of feedback saying, oh, by the way, you could try this or you could do that. So supporting the less experienced diver, well, there's lots of different phases during the diving day when you can do this. Obviously, before the dive, during the dive, and after the dive. So in before the dive, as more experienced divers as we all are now, it's easy for us, isn't it? You rock up at the dive site or at the boat or whatever, 2 minutes flat, you've got your kit together, you're in your dry suit, you're ready to go having a sandwich or a cup of tea or whatever it is that you do before your dives. There's a great opportunity for you to go and help other divers right there in their kit, making sure that they're doing things right. Once you're on the dive, I think that's a bit of an easy one, isn't it? So during the dive, you're there to help and keep people safe, staying close, making sure they're happy, making sure that they're safe. And then after the dive, it's kind of like a reverse, isn't it? Of before the dive, you get out of the water, and again, you're going to be out of your kit, you're going to be having your bacon sandwich or whatever it is. But think about those people who might be flapping a little bit, they might be cold. Is there anything that you can do to support them and make their day a bit better? Think back to when you were a novice diver, what would have made your life better? Okay. So now coming on to dive management. So the first thing is that we want to try and encourage is the prevention of incidents. Okay. Ideally, what we don't want is any incident to happen. Hopefully you're all trained up to the point where should an incident occur, you're going to be confident and be able to go in and resolve those incidents. But what we really want to get to is a position where we've prevented them from happening in the first place. Now, as a dive leader, you will have had much more training on what potentially can go wrong. So you're going to have more awareness. So this means that you can spot things before they happen, but also it means that your opinions will likely have a little bit more sway. So if you see something that looks like it's the beginning of a sort of a snowball effect, then as a dive leader, what you say should be taken with a little bit more gravitas. Now, your responsibility is primarily to yourself and your buddy, but you do have, as you are a more responsible leadership role, you do have a responsibility to the wider group. So just bear that in mind. Now, as a dive manager, if you're the guy in charge, if you're the person in charge of the day, then you obviously have a much greater degree of responsibility. So you are responsible for everybody in the group that day. You are expected to act on any safety concerns. If you have the slightest niggle, then get into the habit of dealing with it. What you don't want is that to escalate and become an incident. So even if it's just a case that you think someone's shoelace isn't tied up and, it doesn't matter, we're on the boat, that could be, someone trips over while you've got divers down, and then you've got someone with a banged head, and you've got divers underwater, which is a bit of an awkward situation to find yourself in. Remember, you carry the delegated authority of the diving officer, who in turn has the delegated authority of the national diving officer. You are in charge. So people have to do what you say, okay? And just remember, is anyone watching out for you? So it's really easy to um, take on all this responsibility, but is there anyone else who's looking out for you at the time? Sharing the load and sharing the responsibility is a good thing to do. Obviously, you will retain ultimate responsibility as a dive manager, but is there anyone else supporting you? Is there anyone else who can help you? Just because you are the dive manager and outrank the national instructor who might happen to be on the boat, um, can they support you? Can they look out for you? Of course they can. So do bear that in mind. Now, we'll just briefly remind you, because this is a really important diagram that you should know off by heart, the incident pit. So this is a representation, it's a visual representation of how incidents snowball and concatenate and then ultimately end up in a very serious or potentially fatal incident. So a good example that I often refer to is that you've got a minor incident. So a minor thing might be, you turn on your gas at the start of the day and you realize that you've only got 190 bar instead of the 230 you were expecting. All right, it's not a problem. And then another small incident is you've brought the wrong fins and they're a size too small. Now, what happens? You go, oh heck, I'll go diving anyway. Jump in the water, and then your foot starts cramping because of the ill-fitting fins, and then you breathe in a little bit heavier. Breathe in a little bit heavier, combined with the the slightly less gas in the cylinders, then becomes a bit more of a problem. And then before you know it, you've cramped up on the bottom, you're running out of gas, and this is where you get very simple things turn into very serious problems. So as I'm sure you realize, just dealing with those issues right at the start is much more is much better than letting them get out of control. And as the dive manager, it's really important that you get it into your head that you should be nipping these things in the bud. So people shouldn't be getting in the water with shonky equipment or not enough gas. Or if they are getting in the water with a lesser gas, then have they adjusted their plan accordingly, remembering the rules of thirds, for example. So prevention starts at home. Yeah. So the basic idea of this is that the sooner you are able to identify potential problems, the sooner you are able to deal with them. So you can do this when you are planning. Okay. So things like risk assessments, they're really good tools. Risk assessments aren't something that you do once every 5 years and then they get filed away in the filing cabinet. Risk assessments should be something that is an active part of your planning. So you review all of the risks that you might have identified last time. Look if they're still applicable. Are there new risks? So I wonder if you go out to your branches, have your branches updated their risk assessments to include COVID, for instance? Don't know. So risk assessment is something that we should be doing dynamically, both before the planning and as we go through the day. Making sure that the diver's qualifications and experience match the diving that you're trying to do. So don't shoehorn, ocean divers onto a boat where you're planning on diving a 25-meter wreck, that sort of thing, or maybe in a raging current. Equipment and condition and suitability. So yeah, if you are dive managing a load of people jumping off the boat to go on a 40-meter wreck, is the person on a 10-liter tank in a good condition to go diving? Probably not. So that sort of thing. And then of course the conditions on the day. So is the weather suitable? Is the sea state okay? Is the visibility okay? All that side of things. Okay, so there is a lot of work there that needs to be done on assessing the risks before and then on the day itself. So you may not have heard of this before, but hopefully you have. But if you haven't, it's a great tool. This is called MAP, which is Monitor, Analyze, Predict, and Plan. So we do this typically as a dive management tool. Okay, so we're watching for situations or things that might change. So this is the monitoring stage. So if you're on the if you're this person on the boat there and you are monitoring for things that might change, what things could change on you as you progress through the diving day or while you've got divers down? What sort of things would you be looking out for? So Barry immediately has jumped in there. I think Barry's the quickest typer in the room. Barry's saying weather. Yeah. Martin says rapid ascent. So this is something that we could talk about later on. Barry has come back with increased currents. So yeah, I think we could probably put that under sea conditions. Anything else that you could be watching out for, situations while you're on the high seas? Anything else to look out for? Okay, so other things. There we go. Mary's come up with boat traffic. So yeah, surface traffic is a really important one. Danny says people's changing attitudes to safety. Yeah, interesting. DCI issues, seasickness. Yeah, they're all valid things to look for. We've also got diver position, which is a good one. And as a dive manager, this is a good one to throw in. Are people doing their buddy checks? So that's a really good preventative measure. Are people doing that? And then yeah, signs and symptoms, which is what Martin said there about DCI issues. We've also got late divers. Yeah, so that's a good monitoring thing. So we've got our diver slate, so we should know what time people are expected back. So if they're overdue, you know that. Okay, so let's keep the conversation going here. So we've got the next phase, which is analyze. So using the information to make a judgment. So here's an example, and I'd like you to come back with what you do in terms of this. So you're watching divers bubbles, or maybe you're watching their SMB, and then suddenly they do a 180-degree turn. What could that mean? What would you analyze that to mean? So Barry says it could be a problem. Yeah, it could be. Anything else? Any other ideas? They're lost. Yeah, also very likely. Someone's lost something. Yeah, that's a good thought, isn't it? Yeah, from Mary there. Well, in this example, or Martin's there turn to assist others. There we go. So Rob's come back with the answer, which we were looking for, which is they're halfway through the dive and they're now coming back. It doesn't always mean that there's something wrong. It might just be very predictable. Okay. Let's have another look at an example. Unusually large quantity of bubbles at the surface. What about that? What would that mean? Yeah. So Martin, Barry both come up with free flow. Yeah, that's entirely possible. Danny's saying, yeah, stress is a good example. Equipment failure. Yeah, that's quite right. Um, so yeah, that's what we've been thinking as well. So equipment issue or perhaps a gas emergency. So that's the analyze phrase. So we've looked at what's happening and then we've analyzed what it could be. And the next stage is predicting. So what's the next things that you could expect to happen? So um, let's have another look at an example. So keep shouting out your answers. You're watching Divers Bubbles or SMB, and you are predicting an exit time. So what sort of things could you use to help predict an exit time when you are watching? You're monitoring divers from above. What could you use to predict their exit time? So yeah, Barry's saying there the dive plan. So yeah, you know when they went in. You've jotted it down on the dive management slate, as James pointed out. That's absolutely right. And Martin's there come up with an interesting one: SMB appearance. So yeah, if you're using a DSMB, a safety sausage, rather than the buoy type SMBs, You can sometimes observe how they're sitting in the water. It's not always the case, but usually if they're suddenly standing upright from time to time, that usually means that the line's been pulled tight, um, and the person is ascending. Mary J saying when the bubbles stay in one place, that's a good thing. Yeah, so it means that perhaps they're on their safety stop. And he says sometimes, yeah, if the visibility is good, then you can sometimes see people on the safety stop. Now, another good hint to bear in mind is the size of bubbles. Now, if if you think about when you've observed divers, when you have divers who are really close to the surface, um, their gas that they're breathing out is in big bubbles and it reaches the surface in big bubbles. So you see them blub, blub, blub. Now, a diver who's really deep down, as the gas is ascending, the bubbles break up into smaller and smaller bubbles. So the appearance of gas erupting on the surface from someone very deep and someone very shallow are completely different. So you can use that to identify where people are on their dives. So that's really useful if you've perhaps only got a couple of meters of viz. So another example. So this is what we were looking at on the last slide. Whoops. You've got an unusually large quantity of bubbles at the surface. Um, what could that mean? What could happen next? So Barry's saying that there could be an air ascent. James says panic diver or free flow. Yep. Anything else? Okay. So while we're waiting, so yeah, so there's a perhaps a rescue in the offing. So yeah, someone might be coming to the surface very soon. That's something that you need to think about. And someone may have missed stops. So um, yeah, Mary's saying there that surfacing divers could be shouting for help. Yep, fair point. So if that's the case, if you suddenly see an unexpected large quantity of bubbles, have just a quick glance around the boat. Are you in a position to effect a rescue? Do you know where the O2 is and everything like that? Hopefully you should, but just remind yourself, make sure you know where everything is. And if you've got other people assisting you on the boat, let them know what you've seen. Now, prevention of, planning. So this is ultimately what you do. So you've monitored, you've kept an eye on things, you've worked out what's happening, or you've had a good stab at what's happening. You think that you know what's going to happen next. So then we go on to planning. What are we going to do about it? So we've got that watching the divers, bubbles, or SMB. So you've watched the divers going out and then they've done a 180 and they're on their way back now. So we're gonna go on the basis that there's no emergency there. So what sort of things could you be doing if you were the dive manager? Yeah, so prepare the boat to recover divers is what you guys are saying there, which is absolutely spot on. Yeah, get ready. So get the tea. Tell Wave 2 to think about kitting up, clean up the boat. Yeah, get ready to recover those divers. What about the second example? So the sudden eruption of bubbles. What sort of thing would you be getting going um, before anyone actually appeared at the surface? So yeah, Martin's saying that O2 on standby. That's a really good answer. Anything else that we could be doing? Prepare first aid kit. Um, so James says call the Coast Guard. That might be a little bit premature, but you certainly could be ready to call the Coast Guard, couldn't you? So you could have your radio tuned onto the correct channel, which I'm sure you'll remember is channel 16. Um, Other stuff, general housekeeping. So get the boat clear. So have people ready to assist. So this is monitor, analyze, predict, and plan. So this is a really useful tool that you should be using as a dive manager and as a dive leader. And this works on boats, it works on land, any type of diving. You can use it underwater as well. So just bear that in mind. Now, just a note on ego, and we'll sort of talk about this on the next sort of slide. But ego's not got much place in diving, which I'm sure you'll find is very hard to believe, given some of the divers that you will have encountered over the years. I'm sure. Yeah, lose it, lose the ego. You are not infallible, um, and you shouldn't expect yourself to be, and nor is anyone else. Um, So there's always going to be a bigger fish. There's always going to be a more experienced scuba diver, and there's also almost always going to be less experienced divers. We're all somewhere on a journey, aren't we? And having an ego and trying to be, trying to position yourself as in a particular way is not necessarily going to be beneficial to other people in your club. So try not to be that person. And also, as we said, you can be you can be teaching or being role model behavior to more experienced divers than yourself. And the same can be said for ocean divers and sports divers. You can still learn things from them. So don't get that thing where I'm a dive leader, I'm big bad dive leader now, I don't need to listen to this, the sports divers. Just try and be humble. Um, this is the thing that was one of the best things about BSAC is the community approach and the fact that you can learn from people who are just in it for the passion rather than in it for a paycheck. So if you don't open your ears and absorb these things, then you're really missing out on one of the biggest benefits of being in BSAC. Other things that you can pick up from others, just as a happy byproduct, is equipment configurations. So you might see things that you wanted to try out. Now, just bear in mind that there's a certain element of um, uh, cautiousness that you should take this. For instance, I saw a person a couple of years ago getting out of Vob's the Key with a rebreather that they've made themselves out of drainage pipe. I'm not sure that that would be something that you would want to take on yourself, but it's definitely worth keeping your eyes open and adopting new skills. But as I say, it might be something that isn't safe. So you need to use your judgment, your education. That you need to absorb these things and decide whether or not they are useful. You see someone getting out with a rebreather and go, "Wow, that's a good idea." You don't Doesn't mean to say that you should just go straight out and go onto eBay and buy a second-hand one and jump in the water. Clearly, you need training first. So this sort of brings us on to risky behavior. So for you in the room this evening, what do you think constitutes risky behavior? So have we got any thoughts on if someone exhibited risky behavior to you on a dive site, what sort of thing, what sort of examples might you give? So not doing buddy checks, overly lax instructors. Not sure what that one means. Um, yeah, missing deco or safety stops. That's definitely risky behaviour. Complacency. That's a good one. Anything else? Diving too deep. Yeah, that sort of thing. Not diving the plan. Yeah. So um, all these can, I think, be kind of categorized into a number of things, can't they? So yeah, Chris has said 2 meters more, it'll be okay, or essentially the same as James is saying, which is too much confidence, isn't it? So we've got like bad practice, using the kit wrong, lack of planning, um, but essentially anything that might lead to an unsafe situation. Now, where can you see these things? Um, Anywhere and on anyone. Yeah, so it might be that they're inexperienced or it could be overconfidence. Just bear in mind, that just because someone is a very experienced diver doesn't mean to say that they are absolutely perfect. They might have got into a habit of making poor judgments, and they've got away with it so many times that they think that it's fine. They don't need to worry about it, and that becomes a problem. Now, incidentally, just as a side note here, um, these kind of things feed into um, a lot of what you were talking about in the text there, feed into human factors. And if you're not familiar with the concept of human factors, it's definitely one that you should look up as dive leaders. There's a couple of presentations on this, one of which I've presented, but there's some others that are really useful that talk about what human factors are. And how they impact on your diving and how we can try and mitigate that. It's a really useful way of thinking, and I strongly encourage you all to have a look at that. Now, one thing that sort of is a good example of this, of a human factor, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if you've heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, but it applies to almost anything that you get into, whether it's scuba diving, letter writing, hang gliding, making the bed, whatever. It'll go through this same effect. And basically it goes like this. So you first appear at a diving club and you've never dived before, and your competence and your confidence is really low. You're nervous about it. You're like, ooh, don't like this. And then you do a little bit of training and you might get to sports diver or perhaps even dive leader. And suddenly your confidence, because you've got good at it, your confidence has gone really through the roof, but without that being buffered or being balanced by competence. Um, and then as you get more and more competent, you start to realize that where you previously thought you knew everything, actually there's a heck of a lot more to know. And then you get to the whole depression phase where you think this is far too much for me. And then you get it's starting to make sense now. Um, and that whole it's starting to make sense now is I'm not sure I'm even at that point yet. And I've been diving for decades and teaching for almost as long. And then eventually you get to be a big bad national instructor like our national diving officer, and then they'll tell you it's complicated. So the reason why I show this is because it's important that you're mindful of the Dunning-Kruger effect. As soon as you think you're confident about something, just remember, am I at the peak of that Dunning-Kruger effect? Because that's quite a dangerous place to be, is that I know everything. So just bear that in mind. So recognizing issues as a dive leader is an important one. It's that preventative. Now, with equipment, you're more likely as you get out there and do more challenging dives, you're more likely to see divers who are using new and different equipment, and it's quite important that you are you feel empowered to go and ask about them and confident enough, because if there is an issue, you're going to have to deal with that equipment, aren't you? So make sure you're aware. So if you happen to have a rebreather diver on the boat and your dive manager, ask about how they get out the kit. It's not just necessarily a buddy check that you need to know how to get out. It's the dive manager will need to know as well. So things like that are quite important. So if different kit, unfamiliar kits, get to know it. Another one is a poor state of repair. So you are responsible for for other divers in the water. And we really ought to be calling out where there's kit that's in a shoddy state of repair. If it's unsafe, it shouldn't be in the water. And then another one is unfamiliar techniques. Now, hopefully, there's not that many techniques out there as you've got to dive leader that you don't know what's going on or you can't work out what's going on. But if there is it's really hard, because if someone just suddenly presents a really weird thing that they're doing, it might seem really odd to you. But it's a case of reapplying that map thing. So if you're diving with a rebreather diver and suddenly they kneel down, they don't appear to be in distress, but they're pressing buttons on their computer, and that's going to be an unfamiliar thing for you. But the important thing is to be prepared. So you're analysing, you're thinking, well, if faffing with the computer is that a sign of something bad? So then you're predicting, well, if it is something bad, the next things that I might be seeing are this, and then how will I deal with that? Okay, so it's that sort of thing. So things to look out for with conduct. So lack of communication is a really important one. So if you're in a dive management or just being a dive leader and you see that buddies aren't communicating, we should be intervening and making sure that they know each between the two of them what's going on. That every dive ought to have a briefing, even if it's just a 2-minute one. We're going to get in, we're going to go down to 30 meters, we'll swim around northwards, and then we'll come back, and then we'll ascend. There still needs to be a briefing. If that's not happening, instigate it. Make sure it is happening. The same goes for planning. So if you see that people haven't planned their dive or don't know what's going on, we should be intervening. And also peer pressure. So people, especially once you're out on the high seas, people do feel a lot of pressure to go through with a dive if they're not comfortable. You should be that person's, right-hand person and be their ally. So if there is any hint of peer pressure, make sure that you're standing up for the person that's being pressured and letting them know that they don't have to do anything they don't want to. It's really important. Peer pressure is a very strong contributing factor to diving incidents. And then knowledge transfer. So this is a very common one. So you will occasionally see things which previously were sort of established norms in diving, which are no longer the case. So a very good example of that, which perhaps some of you will have seen, is the whole we turn the tap or the knob on a gas tank, we turn it all the way up and then a quarter turn back. And this is something that's not being required for many decades now. It's from an old type of valve that isn't really in use anymore. And actually, the act of doing that half turn back or quarter turn back actually introduces confusion that there didn't need to be, and in a lot of cases is implied in emergencies where people have had out of gas scenarios at depth, and it's because their tank's been a quarter turn open, not a quarter turn closed. So things like that, knowledge transfer. So check that if you overhear something, then do intervene. And trust your instincts. If you see something that's not quite right, do feel empowered to go forth and tackle it. As long as you do things in the right way, in a tactful manner, then it won't matter. You might get corrected, and the thing that was your gut instinct was wrong. That's absolutely fine. You should, that's a learning opportunity for you. But if it was the other way around and they were doing something wrong, you might have just, saved someone's life. So just bear that in mind. So yeah, as I say, it's really important that you do raise these things and that you're tactful. Right. So if you are if you're a dive manager or a diver and you observe some risky behavior, consider just having that conversation first of all. But what next? What can you do if talking to them they don't see the light and you don't see your wisdom? They're still dead set on getting into the water with that drain pipe that's filled with sorb, with an O2 canister strapped to it. Well, if it's not appropriate or it's not resolved, then talk to the dive manager if you're not the dive manager. If you are the dive manager, first of all, establish, is there a problem if someone's reported something to you? If you can, take action. If that's just a case that there's something, their BC's a bit shonky, then if you've got the option, then swap it out for a better one, that sort of thing. Or, it might be the case that they've not planned a dive. Well, insist that they plan their dive. But ultimately, as the dive manager, you can suspend someone from the activity. You do have that option up your sleeve, but do bear in mind it's very heavy-handed. It will cause problems, almost certainly, and it's your last resort. But you know do feel empowered to use that tool if you need to. If you do have to suspend someone from diving on a day, you must inform the diving officer. They'll need to potentially dig into that a lot deeper and deal with it within club policy. So let's talk about role model behavior. And I think we mentioned this in the chat earlier. So role model behavior is really important. Now, as a responsible dive leader, you're going to be people will be looking up to you. And inexperienced members of your club will copy your behaviors, even experienced members, in fact. So this whole thing of do as I say, not as I do, it has no place in diving. And there's two ways that you can and should be exhibiting this role model behavior that we're talking about, and these are through your words and through your actions. So let's have a look at what is a role model. So I think, yeah, so let's have some more answers in the chat. What do you think are the characteristics of a role model? What would you look for? Perhaps if you think back to when you were an ocean diver or a sports diver and you were looking up to people in the club, what sort of things would you say were good characteristics? And also, perhaps if you are looking at perhaps sports divers for earlier in the progression, what other things would you think make them good role models to ocean divers, for instance? So someone who installs the right way, instructors doing buddy checks, that's a good example. Someone who exhibits good, correct skills. Martin's saying someone who takes time to help you out, even if you're not your buddy. Yeah, that's a good one. Um, let's have a think. So some of the ones we've got down, always keen to learn. Is let's see. Alan says taking initiative to assist the dive manager. That's a great role model behavior. Yeah. Doing debriefs, encouraging good practice and praising it is a good one that Barry's just highlighted there. Attention to safety. Yeah. Confident is good role model behavior, even if you don't feel it on the inside. Gets on easily with others. Has decent equipment in good condition. Buy quality equipment. You don't need to suddenly go out and drop £5,000 on a load of Gucci kit. It just equipment that is up to standard and it is safe and robust is enough. Other things, high level of skill is a good one. Ideally, someone who should be fit and healthy, knows what they're talking about, and shows care for the environment. That's another good one, especially in places where, you know, in a quarry, less important, one might argue, but if you were diving above coral or anything fragile, you know, showing care for the environment is a really good role model behavior. So, yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, other people will replicate your behavior and they'll do this actively. So if they see you doing something which is a shortcut or a backwards way of doing something, they might actively copy you because they think, oh, well, so and so does that. That's obviously a good idea. Or alternatively, subconsciously they'll do it as well. So you know, things like not doing a buddy check. People might not actively. It might not be the case that they've actively decided not to do a buddy check, but they've just they've just gone along with it. Others will want to be as good as you. So because you're being looked up to, people will want to be as good. They'll want to demonstrate themselves that they are as good as you. So they'll try and achieve what you're achieving. So what they will try to achieve, they're only going to go as far as the next role model. So they don't know what to look up to in diving. It's not like we've got these, you know, if you're a footballer and you're a youth learning, just getting used to playing football, you've got these folks on TV who are great role models of the game, and they know what they're trying to get to. They can see that very high level. But within a club, they may not have that wider perspective. They may only have you as a role model, so their bar is only going to be as high as yours. So your what you do will directly impact on the people who look up to you. So the things that you do might help build confidence and provide motivation. So this might be actively by telling people that they've done a good job, as Barry mentioned there, encouraging good practice and praising it. But it also might be by them copying what you're doing and succeeding and having a better dive by doing it. They're going to build their own confidence without necessarily you having to say a single thing. So what about if we turn it on its head? Well, the problem is that less experienced divers are less likely that they're not going to be able to pick up on these bad habits as bad habits necessarily, because as it says there, you don't know what you don't know. You might not realize that the thing that you're seeing is something that's quite dangerous. And one thing to bear in mind is that one of the strengths of BSAC is also sometimes a little bit of a weakness that we need to try and preempt, which is the snowball effect. So it only takes one bad person doing bad practice in a branch, and it starts to snowball, and other people start to pick that behavior up. So we do see it from time to times where you might have a person was taught a skill and not quite the right technique, and then they teach people in their own branch, and then those people become instructors and pass it on and pass it on. You get this huge effect where you've got 30, 40 divers all doing the things slightly wrong. Now, it might be absolutely fine, or it could be really dangerous. So it's important that you are mindful of this and try and keep yourself behaving in the correct ways, and certainly not giving people the wrong end of the stick on anything. So it also, there's a reputational risk. So if you do something unadvisable, you're going to give a bad name to scuba diving, first of all, if bad things happen, or you may give your own branch a bad reputation, or whatever. So don't be that. Don't be remembered for the wrong reason. So considering something to consider about role models is that it's really easy as you get further up in your diving career, that you tend to have less in the way of gurus to look up to. But do you have a role model? If not, try and look out for people in more experienced or more skilled positions in the club or in BSAC altogether. And what you want to be thinking is, why are they a role model to you? What is it that you are wanting to get from them? And then also think about how you can then pass this downstream to other people within your club. Now, nobody's perfect, so it might be that you could choose to pick up things from a role model who exhibits certain behaviors which you think are brilliant, and they might have other aspects which you think are less than brilliant. So you could have, if you're an aspiring instructor, you might think, oh gosh, that person is really, really good at demonstrating skills, but they're really rubbish at giving briefings. Well, yeah, they can only do their best. I mean, you can perhaps give them some advice or praise or whatever, but take what you can from everyone, and try and morph that into making yourself a better person. Okay. Now, as you go on, you might find that that role model that you looked up to becomes less of a role model. You might realize that actually the person who taught me ocean diver all those years ago, gosh, they're doing some slightly iffy behavior. It's all right for you to change that, to turn the tables, and ask questions of those people and say, is what you're doing right? You know, do stand up for those things. So as we mentioned in an earlier slide, have some confidence and have a bit of integrity and honesty with people. So if there are things that you're identifying that might be problematic, then go ahead, ask. So other role model behavior that I wanted to touch on briefly, professionalism and courtesy is quite an important one. So you're going to be taking a more professional role in the branch. You will be doing stuff which, you know, in another world might be classed as a paid job. We're not paid, are we? But you know, if you go on holiday to a dive center, the role of a dive leader is definitely a job, isn't it? And there's some professionalism that goes hand in hand with that. So things like choice of language and friendliness and openness, tone of voice, positivity versus negativity. So try to keep your language professional especially if you're with novice divers that perhaps are new to the club. Always be positive and try and keep that sharpness. It's very easy when you're trying to be the responsible dive leader to have quite a sharp tone, that sort of school teacher tone. Try and keep that out of diving. Try and be as friendly and positive as possible. And then positivity versus negativity. So if you've not got anything positive to say, then just try and not say it. So don't bash other dive organizations, don't bash other dive clubs and things like that. Just always try and think of positive things to say. And also on that, we're all big fans in scuba diving of those long shaggy dog stories about the adventures that we've got into and the times that we nearly did this and this happened. What you think's really funny as a dive leader, that time when your dry suit flooded and you nearly died of hypothermia. You might think that was really funny, but others may find it absolutely terrifying, especially people who are brand new to diving. So just be mindful of those stories and think about how other people will perceive them. On language, just briefly, there's lots of other presentations out there, including some that I've done recently about diversity and inclusion. But just a brief note on inclusive language. It's really important now that we try to keep our terms gender neutral as possible. People don't like other people making assumptions about them, so try to use things like folks rather than ladies and gents. Think about whether or not you're using different language or different tone with men or women or other groups. So just because you are with a load of men doesn't mean to say that you can treat them all like the perception of men. Okay, treat everyone the same, and then everyone's treated fairly. Okay. With names and pronouns, so if people have said that they have a particular pronoun, we should make an effort to use it. So if they want to be referred to as they, don't question it. It's not for you to decide. It's for them to decide. It's their pronoun, so you use it. If we're in a very multicultural society and we've got people, brilliant people from all over the world in this country, and that's a great thing. It's one of the strengths of the United Kingdom. But one side of that is that you might find people that you are not overly familiar with how to pronounce their name. Don't try and shorten it or anything like that. Some societies and cultures find that quite offensive. So just, engage with people, treat people like humans, treat how you would like to be treated yourself, and certainly never ever make jokes about a person's name, culture, or any of the protected characteristics. So on the diversity thing, it's really important. You're a role model, okay, and you need to be championing these things. So how can you champion it? So create safe and supportive environments. Try not to exclude people, even inadvertently. So a good example of that, which we've mentioned in other presentations before now, is if your club's socials are always at the pub, you're inadvertently excluding people who may be teetotal for a number of reasons. And that's quite a large proportion of the population. So just bear that in mind. You should be inspiring people to go out and do their very best, regardless of how the person that they are, whether that's what their gender is or whatever their background is. You should be pushing everyone to be their best. If you see discrimination, you see anything that's not right, you should be challenging in it. And if you don't feel confident to challenge it yourself, then you should be reporting it to your diving officer, or if you've got one, your welfare officer. So what can your club do about all of these? So plan dives for all people. So don't get into the habit. I've seen some clubs which are very much, we only do 65-meter dives. That's it. Try and plan dives for all ages, experience, qualification, and finances. Finances is a big one. I'm with a student club, so we have to think about that a lot. We can't do massively expensive trips all the time. As much as we'd all love to go to Barbados every couple of weeks, our members can't afford it. So think about that. And there will be occasions where you might find yourself having to do a dive that is not right at the top of your bucket list. So be it. Every dive's a good dive in my book. As I said, inclusive meetings and socials. Avoid the gendered language and reject common misconceptions. So calling out things that are not right is a good example of that. So diversity and inclusion it's a continuous process. We're not where we need to be as a society, let alone if we're talking about BSAC or otherwise. We are on a path, all of us, and we need to just get a little bit better. And it's just try and be nice to people. As James says, simply respect everyone. It's not hard, is it? Okay, so that's some role model behavior. That's tied into role model behavior. So that's role model behavior with your words, isn't it? So let's go back to your actions again. So an example of role model actions is equipment. So is your equipment in a good state of repair and taken care of? Now, as I mentioned earlier, you don't need to have the most expensive kit on the market, but it does need to be in service. A good example of this, and one which I find slightly irritating, is people turning up at dive sites with regulators with the little tags on that tell you when the regulator is due for service, and it's a year gone by. Doesn't matter that we've had COVID or whatever. If you're planning to behave like that, then don't advertise the fact. Certainly don't ask the service tech not to put it on, but actually what you need to be doing in reality is making sure that your kit is in service. It's really important. Does your regulator purge button have a massive crack running through the middle of it? If it does, get it fixed. You're a role model. You should be behaving like one. Other things, as you get more and more experienced with your kit, you might find, oh, I prefer my AS to be tucked under my armpit for whatever reason. That's not how it ought to be. We need to make sure that we are adhering to general accepted norms. So, for instance, regulator in the sort of square formed by your shoulders and your hips. That should be where your AS is. It also it avoids that whole us and them. Everyone's tries to be in it together, so you don't want to be the guy that turns up in the the £5 worth of kit, and then all of the divers that you're diving with are all in scabby old wetsuits that they've bought off eBay and things like that. Try and keep your kit as comparable as possible. So if all your divers are diving in 10-litre tanks and you're all doing some shallow diving, then maybe a rebreather isn't the thing to dive in. Just saying. So configuration, I mentioned about the AS already, but things like right hand release weight belts, it's another bugbear of mine. There is a convention, not everyone adheres to it, but there is one, which is that your weight belt should undo with a right hand release. So you should form your right hand into a hook and it should unbuckle the belt, and that makes it quicker if anyone else is going to undo a weight belt. If there's a reason why you're not doing that, make sure you're very clearly communicating that in buddy checks. And then safe behaviors. So things like, don't pick up weight belts by the buckle, because all the weights will slide off. It might be fine that you've got weight tensioners on there and that it's your belt and you know how it works. But you behave like that, and less experienced divers will just copy that behavior, and they've got broken toes as a result. And broken toes, they'll try and dive, and then they'll get cramp in their foot, and then we're back in the incident pit. Um, don't leave your kit stood up. Don't leave it lying in puddles. Just, even if you're using club kit, treat it like it's gold, and then hopefully other people will behave in a similar manner. So then let's have a look at beyond diving. So as a dive leader, you're gonna be more influential. Okay. It might not feel like it, but you will be. You'll have a strong what you say will have more weight. You've said this already. So you might be able to influence club trips, decisions, diving practice. It's a good idea, if you've not already, to consider whether or not there's anything on the committee that you can do. Just because not the traditional committee roles, you might not feel that you want to do chairperson or diving officer, pardon me. But there might be other roles that they can create, or you can support other roles. So this is really important. And then, of course, we've talked about this leadership. You need to be doing this both when diving and not. So when you are in the club itself, just because you're not got a wetsuit on doesn't mean to say that you can't help and demonstrate those qualities that you're wanting to display. So things like helping people get whatever they're wanting to do done. So that might be in a planning session, things like that. Bear in mind, if people look at you as a role model in diving, there's chances are they'll look at you as a role model for other things as well. So if you do things which are less amazing, so for instance, you've put on a really good show, you've made everyone think that you're a great diver and a wonderful person throughout the day, and then you jump into your car and then you do a burnout out the car park, it's going to undermine everything that you've tried to do. Well, it's going to have one of two outcomes, isn't it? It's going to undermine what people think of you, or if they're all absolutely pie-eyed and think you're the bee's knees, then everyone else is going to go and do a burnout out of the car park, which is not a good thing. But it's probably the former, isn't it? So don't undermine all the good work that you do by not being a role model in other things. So just bear that in mind. And then finally, we're coming towards the end. It's not just about diving. So there are other things that you can do in the community. So I've mentioned joining the committee, but one thing that would be nice to see our dive leaders in BSAC doing more is organising less of the let's just go diving, and organising things like try dives. Perhaps getting more involved with BSAC as an organisation. So there's always things like the BSAC committee and work to do with HQ. So for a good example of that, I'm teaching stuff for BSAC HQ tonight. So there's things that you can get involved in. It'd be great to see more charity work, cleanups, things like that. And it's a great opportunity to get families and young people involved. And then, of course, raising money is really a good thing to do. So we do a fair bit of fundraising for the RNLI in my club, and also things like debt therapy. It's a good idea, if you've not already, go forth to your branches and say, I think we should do this. Why not? What's the worst that can happen? You only raise £5. Well, you've raised £5 still. It doesn't matter. £5 is £5. And then finally, promote diving. So just, be an evangelist, be a scuba diving evangelist. Go and recruit more people into our club. After all, you enjoy it, so what's to say that other people wouldn't? You're not trying to sell something cynically. You're not in a pyramid scheme. You're trying to sell something great. So go out there and tell people. So that's essentially it. So we've looked at a whole bunch of things. So we talked about what it is about leadership, encouraging other people. We've talked about probably the most important thing on this, which is the risky behaviors and being a good role model. And hopefully you've got some good ideas out of that. And we've also covered diversity, inclusion, and a few other things that you can do aside from that. So hopefully that's been of use to you guys. Now I'll open the floor to any questions. If you want to ask a question in the chat, you're more than welcome. I'm going to click a button now, which, oh no, you can unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question now. So it's all it's all up to you. Otherwise, we tend to get lots of messages saying thank you very much. And of course, you are more than welcome. I'm just glad to see all of you in the room this evening. It's always good to see people doing these extracurricular things and that they're willing to progress themselves. If you do really feel very strongly about how thankful you are, you don't need to send me any presents in the post. What you can do is go to the RNLI website and put a couple of quid in RNLI. That's never a bad thing to do. So that's my advice. So otherwise, I'm going to hang on for a couple more minutes, but I'm going to stop the recording in just a moment. But I'm going to hang on for a couple more minutes if you've got any questions. Otherwise, have a great evening. It's been lovely seeing you all, and thank you for your participation.